Hey everybody, welcome to Database Camp. My name is Sarah and today I'm going to be summarizing a book called How to Create a Mind, The Secret to Human Thought Revealed by Ray Kurzweil. So if you're interested in anything related to the brain, related to artificial intelligence, consciousness, that sort of thing, then stay tuned because it gets pretty weird. So in the beginning, the book starts out with two famous thought experiments. The first being the ideas that led up to the theory of evolution, and the second one gets a bit more attention. It talks about the famous thought experiment developed by Albert Einstein, in which he gives us the oh-so-famous formula E=mc². He uses these two examples not only to highlight how powerful human thought can be unaided by technology, but also as a means to establish how he's going to structure his book, which is by stating his own thoughts on the human mind and his theories about how it operates, followed by research that proves his arguments. Before anything, Kurzweil mulls over his own thoughts to reflect on, thought itself and his notions on how we process information in the brain from a conceptual standpoint. I will quote his findings. Quote, "Number 1, our memories are sequential and in order. They can be accessed in the order that they are remembered. We are unable to directly reverse the sequence of a memory. Number 2, there are no images, videos, or sound recordings stored in the brain. Our memories are stored as sequences of patterns, memories that are not accessed, dim over time. Number 3, we can recognize a pattern even if only part of it is perceived, and even if it contains alterations. Our recognition ability is apparently able to detect invariant features of a pattern's characteristics that survive real-world variations. Number 4, our conscious experience of our perceptions is actually changed by our interpretations. Number 5, we are constantly predicting the future and hypothesizing what we will experience. This expectation influences what we actually perceive. Number 6, each of our routine procedures is remembered as an elaborate hierarchy of nested activities. The same type of hierarchy is involved in our ability to recognize objects and situations." End quote. These observations lead to Kurzweil developing his pattern recognition theory of mind. He believes the neocortex functions as a pattern recognizer. These patterns are recognized within a hierarchy of higher or lower level concepts. So, to use an example straight out of the text, when we read, we first recognize the patterns that make up individual letters. The individual letters in combination with each other then become part of a higher level pattern making up a word we recognize. Then the combination of words again becomes part of a higher level pattern until we reach the desired conceptual hierarchy and are finally able to recognize the message. To back up his theory, Kurzweil presents us with various research projects and experiments that were conducted by neuroscientists that essentially reinforce the validity of his pattern recognition theory of mind. Through scientific research on the brain, these are his findings. He explains that the neuron modules, which are responsible for recognizing patterns, are arranged in a highly organized, grid-like structure. You could imagine neuron modules as bundles of interconnected neurons. These modules each operate with the same algorithm responsible for recognizing patterns regardless of whether or not they are high-level or low-level concepts. The strengths of these connections between neuron modules represents learning, and what is learned is committed to memory for the purposes of being recognized in the future. The reason why our brains are adept at recognizing objects, people, and ideas is because we have many variations and combinations of these same patterns committed to memory, which in turn allows us to, for example, read sloppy handwriting, or decipher what someone with a different accent than you is saying. There's a lot of bugs around here. Since Kurzweil has been mainly focusing on what he refers to as the new brain, the neocortex, he pauses to give credit to the old brain, or reptilian brain, or the brain that existed before we developed a neocortex. 3 particular points of interest were the thalamus, hippocampus, and cerebellum. To put it briefly, as is the nature of a summary, most sensory inputs travel through the thalamus before reaching the neocortex, and without it, we would lose consciousness. The hippocampus is responsible for creating new memories and continued learning. The cerebellum used to be in complete control of our movement. Each of these parts of the brain now work collaboratively alongside the neocortex, so they are still essential to its functioning at its best. Insight as to why humans are able to think in the way that we do is one of the main premises of this book. But Kurzweil shares his own ideas about why mammals developed a neocortex in the first place. Our neocortex serves as our greatest asset to ensure survival for the individual and to reproduce to ensure survival for the species. In the middle of the book, he begins to talk about emotional thoughts. Kurzweil says that spindle neurons are responsible for higher level emotions. These neurons are the largest that exist in the brain and span its entirety. We are not born with these, but develop them from as early as 4 months, and their proliferation occurs the most between the ages of 1 to 3. The spindle cells account for our judgment of morality and our feelings of love, amongst other concepts. So what I gathered from this particular section of the book is that love exists for the purposes of keeping 2 individuals together long enough to provide an enriched environment for the offspring they create. Because a household with 2 parents should ensure that the required stimulation would be met for a developing neocortex. As we get further along in the reading, it becomes clear as to why the book is so titled How to Create a Mind. Because Kurzweil begins to speak on Henry Markram's Blue Brain project that aims to simulate the human brain digitally. Leave that alone, and he speaks on a future where humans can adopt additional brain space in the cloud as to enhance our learning capabilities and back up already established knowledge. He even dares to disclose his own strategy for how he would go about creating a digital mind. I don't know about you, but I would keep that to myself if I were him, but I guess only those who read the book will know about his secrets. But of course, like a gentleman, Kurzweil has to give accolades to the AI heavyweight champions already in existence, like Watson, who beat the most formidable Jeopardy champions of all time, Ken Jennings and Brad Rutter. Also, heavy praise to Wolfram Alpha, the answer engine that delivers solutions for complex math problems or even economics and physics questions. It's incredible that computers are able to achieve the things that they do, that the question often arises of whether or not our own brains can be considered computers. It's a hot button topic, but if they are similar enough, then it should be possible to create a mind within a computer. In Kurzweil's own words, for this to be possible, it needs to adhere to 4 key components. The first is it must be able to communicate, remember, and compute information reliably. The second, it must be able to compute any algorithm. The third is it must include a central processing unit where arithmetical logic and operations are carried out, a memory unit where the program and data are stored, mass storage, a program counter, and both input and output channels. The fourth is it must use the key algorithms employed by the brain and then use these to turn a computer into a brain. Throughout the book, we gain a basic understanding about the anatomy of the brain and how its neurons work together to create a perception of reality. But what of consciousness? The thing observing all it is we perceive. What exactly is responsible for this phenomenon? Kurzweil tries to tackle this question, but because science does not yet have concrete answers, he can only look to philosophy to help explain his position. He breaks down two different schools of thought on consciousness. There's the Western school, which states, quote, "We start with a physical world that evolves patterns of information. After a few billion years of evolution, the entities in that world have evolved sufficiently to become conscious beings," end quote. Then there's the opposing Eastern view that states, quote, "Consciousness is the fundamental reality. The physical world only comes into existence through the thoughts of conscious beings," end quote. The book, How to Create a Mind, not How to Create a Brain. A mind, in Kurzweil's own words, is a brain that is conscious. He adds, we could also say that a mind has free will and an identity. He questions if free will is all just an illusion, and to define our identity as a person is just as challenging as the question of whether or not we have free will. If you make it up to this particular chapter in the book, you will no doubt end up with a touch of existential crisis on your hands. Or existential crises? But ultimately, the resounding message is, you gotta have faith. That whatever the reason for our existence and our awareness of that existence is a worthwhile one. Ray Kurzweil has written many books, and in them makes predictions of technologies we will have access to in various specific points of time in the future. Even in this book, he predicts that the first human-like AI will emerge in the year 2029, and their existence will become commonplace by the 2030s. He makes these predictions using what he calls the law of accelerating returns. He states this law applies to information technology, and he draws out many of his accurate predictions in this book, one such notable one being the exponential growth of computing for the last 110 years. The great advances being made in information technologies such as computation, communication, and biomedicine are leading us toward understanding and recreating the methods of the human brain. I wanted to leave my opinions in the review portion of this video, but I have to give my opinion on the final chapter of this book now as I conclude this summary. I believe the final chapter ends on a bit of a sour note. In it, Kurzweil addresses the many objections of his critics, one man in particular, Paul Allen. One by one, he goes through all of his critiques and demolishes all of them with facts and evidence, even citing a study done by the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology. The critique? Quote, "That software is not progressing in the same exponential manner as hardware," end quote. Kurzweil doesn't even need to waste his breath on this one, and lets the council counter, stating, quote, "Even more remarkable and even less widely understood is that in many areas, performance gains due to improvements in algorithms have vastly exceeded even the dramatic performance gains due to increased processor speed." We could leave it at that, but the quote goes on. "The algorithms that we use today for speech recognition, for natural language translation, for chess playing, for logistics planning, have evolved remarkably in the past decade. Here is just one example, provided by Professor Martin Groschel of Konrad Zuse Zentrum für Informationstechnik Berlin. Sorry if I said that wrong, I probably did. Groschel, an expert in optimization, observes that a benchmark production planning model solved using linear programming would have taken 82 years to solve in 1988. Using the computers and the linear programming algorithms of the day. 15 years later, in 2003, This same model could be solved in roughly 1 minute, an improvement by a factor of roughly 43 million. Of this, a factor of roughly 1,000 was due to increased processor speed, whereas a factor of roughly 43,000 was due to improvements in algorithms. Groeschel also cites an algorithmic improvement of roughly 30,000 for mixed integer programming between 1991 and 2008. The design and analysis of algorithms and the study of the inherent computational complexity of problems are fundamental subfields of computer science. End quote. Allen even tries to undercut Watson's victory in Jeopardy, stating, quote, Watson was assembled by scientists themselves, building each link of narrow knowledge in specific areas. End quote. Kurzweil's rebuttal literally makes me LOL. His reply, quote, this is simply not true, end quote. He explains that not only is his knowledge base wide, spanning the entirety of Wikipedia, but also that the form in which he acquired this information was through reading each Wikipedia page. What makes this more miraculous is that Wikipedia pages are written in natural language, which means it's subject to include puns, similes, and metaphors. The conclusion of this book feels a lot like a court case, and it's falling on deaf ears. It's funny how one of the excerpts on the back of the book say it's solidly argued. Marvin Minsky says Kurzweil's new book on the mind is magnificent, timely, and solidly argued. His best so far. I get what he means when he says arguing his theory or ideas, but by the end of the book, you get the feeling he's literally arguing with his critics. I understand why he would include this final chapter, but I do feel it was a bit unnecessary, simply because it does not seem like his detractors are listening. But I am, and hopefully you are too. I too believe the book to be well written, researched, and argued. It is informative and articulated in a way that won't intimidate the average reader, which leads me to the review portion since I've practically already started. I wanted to have the review portion a little bit less scripted, or entirely unscripted. But it's hard for me to do that simply because I go on tangents and I might have a touch of ADHD or ADD. I haven't been formally diagnosed, so. But it's hard for me to be completely objective with giving a review simply because I'm partial to all things brain and artificial intelligence consciousness goes. I think we're all a bit more curious about things that even science has yet to uncover. So if it was up to me, I'd definitely give it a 9.5 out of 10. But because I know I have that bias, I'm going to give it an 8.7 out of 10. Just to try to curb that bias that I have. Now, as far as how I feel about the book, I think it's a great book. I think it's really interesting. I love that this book is not as technical as some people may think. It does have a bit of philosophy in there. If you really do read the book, I don't want to give too much of it away because I do encourage people to read it. It broadens your horizons about humanity, about why we're all here really, and I like books like that. I like books that challenge our way of thinking. I like books that make you think, you know? Ironically enough, it just makes you think, really. And I really do appreciate that about this book. Again, I did mention that it shouldn't intimidate the average reader. I know there's a lot of people who don't like to go into nonfiction because they feel it might be too technical or that there might be a lot of jargon, but this is a good book to start out with, not only because it is in that whole science realm, it is nonfiction, but also it's not something that is going to overwhelm you. It's something that will intrigue you, hopefully, if you're into that kind of stuff. I could go on, but like I said, I'll probably be rambling a little bit much. But yes, it's a great book, and if you're able to find it, I highly suggest it. Again, this is what it looks like. How to Create a Mind. I know you'll probably see it in like mirror mode, but it's by Ray Kurzweil. He's written a lot of different books. So that's pretty much my review. Like I said, I could go on, but I don't want this video to be 30 minutes long. We'll see how it turns out. But yes, I would definitely recommend this book to anybody who is wanting to dip their toe into nonfiction related to science. Like I said, it's very intriguing. It's not too intimidating. It's not full of jargon. So it's definitely easy to follow along with. You get a sense of his humor as well, which is one of those things that I love to see in these types of books, because a lot of people like to say that they're boring. They're not boring at all, especially when you have an author like Ray Kurzweil. He does have his little sense of humor there, and it is enjoyable to get a feel for the person who is writing this book, because that's another added element to it. It's not purely just research. It's not like you're reading a peer-reviewed article on a lab experiment that was done. You know, it's not like that. It's not super dry. It is a page turner, at least for me. So those are my thoughts. I hope that you enjoyed this video. So yes, those are my thoughts. I hope you liked this video. If you did, please do give it a thumbs up. And if you found it informative, make sure to leave your comments down below. Will you pick up this book? Will you want to read this book? Have I convinced you to read this book? I really hope that you guys do, because if you do, make sure to come back in the comments and tell me what you thought about it, because I would love to have conversations about this book as well. So yes, thank you guys so much for watching. Give it a like, subscribe to the channel. I would really appreciate it, and I'll be seeing you guys in the next video. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.